because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
Today in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
The courtroom was electric with tension, the kind of atmosphere where every shuffle of papers felt like an explosion, every whispered word like a shout. Sean Diddy Combs, the man who built an empire on charisma, talent, and an uncanny ability to read the room, now sat at the center of a storm he could no longer control. His empire was no longer the focus of admiration. It was being dissected, examined for every flaw, every crack, every dark secret he had worked so hard to conceal. But today wasn't just another day in what was already shaping up to be one of the most high-profile trials in recent memory. Today, the prosecution had something that would redefine the case entirely.
I want to mention one other quick thing. They can't find witness number 3 still. This is apparently an ex-girlfriend of Diddy's who was one of the alleged victims. And prosecution can't find her.
Right, I heard.
He looked composed at first glance, but anyone paying close attention could see the signs of strain. The way his jaw tightened every few seconds, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table as if he were trying to maintain some semblance of control. His legal team, a collection of the sharpest minds money could buy, sat beside him whispering in hushed tones, though even they seemed more tense than usual. Across the room, the prosecution was almost serene, their lead attorney holding a flash drive with the confidence of someone who knew they were about to detonate the proceedings. The judge approved. The prosecutor stood up. With a sharp, commanding tone, she declared that the government intended to present new evidence, an audio recording. The mere mention of this caused a stir in the courtroom, but the real shock came with her next statement. She revealed the recording included testimony from Christian Combs. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Christian Combs, Diddy's son. The judge struck her gavel in an attempt to restore order, but the impact of the revelation had already taken hold. Gasps, hurried whispers, even audible expletives filled the air as the significance of the announcement set in.
The defense wanted to propose a question on, after the potential jurors filled out their questionnaire, have they seen any news media, any documentaries, anything just relating to a news medium, and whether or not they saw it in between them filling out the questionnaire to Monday morning when they saw, or when they go to jury selection.
Christian's name had lingered in the shadows of this case, mentioned only in passing. A figure many assumed would remain silent. But now he was at the center of it all. His voice, the very thing that could shatter his father's defense. The room stilled, as the prosecutor pressed play. And Christian's voice filled the air. It was steady, deliberate, and carried the weight of someone who had thought long and hard about what he was about to reveal. He began by recounting moments only someone with an intimate view of Diddy's world could describe. Christian spoke of gatherings held in private mansions far from prying eyes, where the guest lists were curated with precision. According to his testimony, these weren't just parties, they were orchestrated productions. He described the atmosphere as one of exclusivity, but also of control, where attendees knew the unspoken rules: no cameras, no phones, no questions. He went on to mention how certain individuals would arrive escorted by intermediaries, and how their presence often came with envelopes of cash, handed out later. Silence money, as he called it.
In her civil lawsuit, Cassie said that she was the victim of abuse, assault, and at the hands of Diddy.
Christian didn't stop there. He painted a picture of a world where loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded. He alleged that his father's inner circle operated like a machine, with Diddy at the helm dictating every move. According to Christian, even family wasn't exempt from the rules. He detailed conversations he'd overheard, where people were warned about the consequences of crossing Diddy. He always made sure people knew he could make or break them, Christian said in the recording. His voice tinged with a mix of resignation and bitterness. The recording also addressed financial transactions that raised serious suspicions. Christian stated that he had seen spreadsheets detailing payments to various individuals, some of whom were later instructed to keep their stories straight when questioned by others. He described private flights, not just for business or leisure, but for purposes that seemed intentionally vague. Everything had a purpose, and it was always Diddy's purpose.
The U.S. judge has ruled that the rapper and producer Sean Diddy Combs will stand trial on federal trafficking and racketeering charges in May. He'll be held in prison until then. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that he used his business empire to transport women and male workers across state lines to take part in recorded performances. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
Diddy's reaction to the recording was immediate and intense. Initially, he sat frozen, his face pale, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His attorneys leaned in, whispering urgently. But he didn't respond. As Christian's words became more specific, mentioning dates, locations, even names, something in Diddy snapped. He pushed his chair back abruptly, the screech echoing through the courtroom, and stood up. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. He gestured wildly toward the speakers, declaring that it was a setup, that his own son was lying. The courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, fingers flying across keyboards, cameras flashing like strobes. Spectators whispered frantically, their shock written all over their faces. The judge struck her gavel repeatedly, demanding order. But Diddy wasn't finished. He yelled, "They don't know what they're doing. This is my family. My life." His lawyers tried to calm him, but it was too late. U.S. Marshals stepped in, took him by the arms, escorted him out. The doors closed behind him with a heavy finality, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence.
Hey, real quickly, all that commissary stuff, he's not getting any of that because people in the SHU have an abbreviated list. So he's out of luck. No stake for him. Yeah, he is on watch. This guy thought he would have went home. All of a sudden, he didn't get bond. Remember, the first night that he was there.
Outside, the media frenzy was already in full swing. News vans lined the streets. Reporters jostled for position. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #DiddyBreakdown and #ChristianSpeaks trended within minutes. Fans and critics alike weighed in. Opinions polarized as ever. Some hailed Christian as a hero, someone brave enough to speak the truth. Others accused him of betrayal, questioning his motives, speculating about deals struck with prosecutors. But the recording was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, whispers of more evidence began to circulate. Sources close to the case hinted at additional recordings, emails, financial documents, pieces that could further unravel Diddy's carefully constructed image. Rumors swirled that other family members might be called to testify. And then there were the lawsuits, dozens of them, each one adding another layer to the already complex web of allegations.
Now, to the latest on the arrest of Sean Diddy Combs. This one has so many people talking. The disgraced music mogul facing federal racketeering, conspiracy, and trafficking charges. Both the prosecution and defense teams are set to discuss the next phase of action following the indictment, as investigators work to determine potential co-conspirators. But how exactly did we get here?
Particularly damning civil suit, filed by a former employee, claimed that Diddy's company operated with a culture of fear and secrecy. The plaintiff alleged that employees were often coerced into signing non-disclosure agreements, and those who refused were quietly replaced. Another suit, brought by a woman identified only as Victim 3, described manipulation and intimidation, painting a chilling portrait of a man who used his power to silence anyone who dared speak out. As the judge adjourned the session, the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was an unmasking, a public dissection of a man who had spent decades crafting an image of invincibility. And yet, the cracks were undeniable. The walls were closing in. The question now wasn't if Diddy's empire would fall. It was how much would collapse with it, and who else might get caught in the wreckage.
This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly.
This wasn't just about a son's betrayal anymore. The courtroom drama? That was only the surface of a much larger, murkier story. A web so tangled it could trap half of Hollywood, if someone just pulled hard enough. Behind the scenes, the whispers had turned into roars. What had started as quiet rumors about Diddy's unchecked power and the culture he cultivated was now laid bare. Piece by piece. In lawsuits. In testimonies. In a growing pile of evidence that painted a picture of a man who didn't just bend the rules, he rewrote them entirely. And the worst part? He had help. Lots of it. For years, Diddy's empire operated not just as a business, but as a fortress, built to protect its king at all costs. His record label, his brand partnerships, his sprawling network of attorneys, publicists, and enablers. They were all part of a machine designed to keep the truth buried. Non-disclosure agreements were as common as contracts. According to multiple lawsuits from former employees and associates, this was standard practice. One former staff member, in a lawsuit filed just last year, described how new hires were required to sign NDAs so ironclad. They couldn't even mention the weather, if they'd seen it from one of Diddy's properties.
Not really the judge. The government didn't go into too many details about the extent of the plea offer, but one thing that they had said was pretty much that under the plea offer, he would be facing less time than he's facing if he would have gone to trial. So when the allocution portion came, Diddy stood up. The judge kind of read him everything that he had needed to read to him, just about whether or not he was of sound mind, whether or not...
And it wasn't just staff. It wasn't just staff who were silenced. Several lawsuits detailed a pattern of payouts to individuals who had threatened to go public with stories that could tarnish Diddy's image. One case, filed in California, alleged that a former associate was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to retract claims about questionable dealings at events hosted by Diddy. The plaintiff claimed they were given the money in exchange for signing an agreement that essentially erased their ability to speak on the matter ever again. It was hush money. Plain and simple. But the courts? They'd never called it that, not until now. And then came the bodyguard lawsuit, filed in 2024. This wasn't some random employee. This was someone who had worked for Diddy for over a decade. In his testimony, the bodyguard described what he called a culture of paranoia, alleging that he was often instructed to follow individuals who had fallen out of Diddy's favor, track their movements, report back. He claimed that part of his job was to deliver warnings, subtle at first, but escalating if they didn't comply. The lawsuit also alleged that Diddy had ordered surveillance on former employees who had left the company to make sure they stayed silent. But what made this case particularly explosive was the bodyguard's claim that he had evidence to back it all up, including emails and GPS data. Proof, he said, of the lengths Diddy went to in order to maintain control.
I thought Diddy would be throwing all his celebrity mates under the bus.
I mean, that could potentially be coming when it's time for court and when it's time for him to testify. But what we're seeing right now is how important public relations really are to Sean Combs. He's desperately trying to control the narrative behind bars, allowing his attorneys to do documentaries.
The lawsuit, this one filed by a former executive assistant, added even more fuel to the fire. The assistant alleged they had been privy to countless private conversations, where Diddy openly discussed how to handle problems, with payouts and legal threats. One particularly damning detail? The assistant claimed they were tasked with shredding documents and deleting digital files related to the same hush money payments described in other cases. They also alleged they were terminated after hesitating to carry out one of those tasks. A move they claimed was retaliation for not playing along. Diddy's legal team? Of course, they dismissed the claims, called it the ranting of a disgruntled employee. But the lawsuit raised serious questions about just how far the mogul was willing to go to bury his secrets. And then there were the guests, the people who found themselves inside Diddy's world, often without fully understanding what they were stepping into. Lawsuits from multiple individuals described a culture of exclusivity so intoxicating, people would do almost anything to stay in the circle. One woman, who filed anonymously in New York, claimed she was flown to a private island under the pretense of attending a business event. What she found instead, according to her lawsuit, was an atmosphere of control and fear. Phones were confiscated on arrival. Conversations were monitored. And leaving? It wasn't even presented as an option. She alleged that the event's attendees were carefully watched, their actions scrutinized, and their compliance rewarded or punished.
You know, I suppose it could be coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence, and especially given the nature of the case.
Yes.
Because when you look at who is examining these various witnesses, you know, especially female alleged victims, of which there will be 4.
This is very significant, just from who we associate Diddy being and everything we've seen him do over the decades. Like you said, this is quite the downfall to go from. I mean, we saw the mansions back in March that were raided by the feds. So to go from living in those mansions to being in a jail cell right now, I think it really underscores the magnitude of what he's facing and the weight of the federal government.